In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It is important to take care of yourself while listening. Help is available through your local rape crisis center, and you can visit MCASA.org for more information on how to be connected. Hey everyone, it's Meredith, Training and Engagement Specialist at the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and this is MCASA On the Go, the official podcast of the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. MCASA is the federally recognized state sexual assault coalition providing training, technical assistance, and policy advocacy to rape crisis centers and member organizations across the state. MCASA also provides direct legal services to survivors of sexual assault through our Sexual Assault Legal Institute. In this podcast, we discuss topics including but not limited to sexual violence prevention and response, legal issues surrounding sexual violence, and highlighting services available for survivors across the state of Maryland. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, where we work to build a connected community dedicated to ending sexual violence and supporting survivors. So we wanted to bring back our Sexual Assault Awareness Month podcast series. In today's episode, I sit down with Maddy, MCASA's policy advocate for prevention education, and our spring program interns, Hanah and Rhea, to talk about self-care during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. All right, everyone, welcome to the first episode of our Sexual Assault Awareness Month podcast series. So excited to have Maddy back for this series and to have our program interns for this spring, Rhea and Hanah, with us as well. If y'all just want to start by introducing yourselves, then we can go ahead and get started.
Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Maddy LaCure. I'm the policy advocate for prevention and education at MCASA. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Hanah Ajamian. I'm one of the program interns, and I also use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Rhea. I'm also a program intern, and I also use she, her pronouns.
So we thought we would just kick off our SAAM podcast series by talking about self-care and how both survivors and folks who work in the field of sexual assault prevention and response can take time for self-care and just talk about what we do for self-care. And maybe this will resonate with some folks. Maybe you can learn a few things to incorporate into your own self-care. Hanah and Rhea are going to lead us through this episode. They've done a lot of research on this topic, and so we want to highlight their work. So I will just hand it off to them so we can get started.
Yeah, thank you. So, self-care has become a really popular topic of discussion, especially coming out of going into the COVID-19 pandemic and also still being in the midst of it. I think folks have really started to explore the topic of mental health, diving deeper into that and how to take care of yourself during these hard times. However, the term gets used so much, I feel, especially on social media and just in other forms of media, that I feel like self-care has almost lost some of its meaning. So we really wanted to talk about what self-care means, especially for survivors during Sexual Assault Awareness Month, because we acknowledge that even though good work is being done, the overwhelming amount of information relating to sexual assault that gets put out during this month can be really overwhelming and even triggering to some survivors.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Hanah was saying. Self-care is really used as an umbrella term online, and it could mean so many different things. Just speaking from my experience, I think that it's an extremely important form of self-compassion, and incorporating self-care into your life can help decrease symptoms of anxiety and depression, and it can just overall improve your quality of life, especially for people who've gone through something traumatic. So even for people that have not, I think that it's always a good habit to incorporate.
Yeah, and you all shared with us the definition of self-care that you found, which was the process of establishing behaviors to ensure holistic well-being of oneself. So even the dictionary definition is very, very broad, and I think it's definitely open to interpretation because self-care is so personal to every single person, right? Everyone does something different for self-care. So when you all think of different types of self-care, what first comes to mind?
So when I think of self-care, I usually think of some type of relaxing activity. I know that a lot of people use meditation as a form of self-care, and I heard that it helps with reducing stress and anxiety, especially when if someone's struggling with like racing thoughts or catastrophizing events in your life, I think it just is really good to introspect on those things. So I also heard that meditation can strengthen areas of your brain that are responsible for memory, awareness, learning, and attention. And I don't participate in meditation currently because I have a really hard time just turning my brain off. But a lot of family members of mine take part in meditation after some form of physical activity like yoga or a workout to cool down and use it as a time of introspection, especially after being in something that's so high intensity.
I totally agree with what Rhea was saying about especially practicing some sort of physical activity to help with processing and practicing self-care. I think that's a big thing for a lot of survivors and just people who are practicing self-care in general. I know for myself that journaling is extremely useful, and it's definitely useful for people who have gone through a trauma. When we were doing our research, we came across many psychologists who recommended journaling in order to process your emotions. Journaling can make you feel grounded and at peace with yourself, and just being able to write down your thoughts and see them on paper, it helps you prioritize your problems, especially when you physically can see them in front of you, whether it's in a journal or on a screen. It kind of makes those issues a little bit more manageable rather than letting them fester in your mind, which can just end up making you feel more anxious in the long run. So definitely journaling can help a lot with those overwhelming emotions.
Yeah, so I wanted to also ask Maddy and Meredith, what do you usually do as forms of self-care?
I actually, now that the weather's getting really nice, going out for a walk in the middle of the day has been my biggest form of self-care, especially because, here at MCASA, we're still working from home. So it's nice to get out of my space for 30 to 45 minutes. And especially, like I said, now that the weather's really nice, just enjoying some sunshine and some fresh air and moving my body in ways that feel great. And then it allows me to come back to work with a clear head. That's what I've been doing for self-care recently.
Yeah, and I will echo that. I am a big walker. I love to go for a walk after work, listening to music or listening to a podcast. That's really how I decompress at the end of the day, and really kind of come back to my thoughts and other things going on outside of work. So yeah, I love, agree that the weather is getting nice here now, in the DMV area. So it's great for an evening walk. I also decompress by watching TV. I love TV shows, and that also gives me a chance to watch something, outside of work and my other thoughts that can give me something else to think about and do. So big TV binger over here as well. Yeah, so those are some of the things I do for self-care. Thinking about kind of transitioning to talking about survivors, we know that there are many short and long-term effects that can come from experiencing a trauma like sexual assault or sexual violence. Experts often make distinction between physical and emotional self-care. Physical self-care can include seemingly simple tasks, but they are often difficult to do when going through a traumatic event. Things like getting enough sleep, eating well and balanced diet, incorporating exercise into your daily life, and making sure you have a routine to attend to every day. What do you all think about that?
I think that the routine part is really interesting. That's really something I need to work on. I noticed that when I start getting out of my routine, I start having more like anxiety, and I just feel like I'm not being productive. And for someone who is going through a traumatic event, getting out of bed and brushing your teeth, and even making coffee in the morning, even if it's something you enjoy, like spending time with your friends or something like that, it can require so much effort to do those simple tasks.
Yeah, I agree. I think the part that's interesting to me is that really focusing on basic physical needs is definitely a big part of self-care that can be forgotten about at times. And making sure your basic needs are met first is just a really big part of self-care. Things like making sure you're eating, getting enough water, sleeping, and getting some sort of form of movement in are all really good ways to take care of your mental health. And at times, these things can actually feel maybe overwhelming or maybe be the opposite of what you want to do. But I think when we meet the needs of our body, that we start to see improvements in our mental health. So finding balance between what you want and what you need is really key to any good self-care regimen. Again, whether that's physical health or mental health. So exercise, sleep, and nutrition, and living a routine-oriented lifestyle are great ways to help you work through trauma and triggers that may come with, going through Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Of course, it's so important to be patient with yourself, because these tasks, even though they're good for you, they may seem daunting and you may not even have enough energy to do them. So for me, just always starting by doing one and then slowly adding in more tasks as you feel comfortable is really key. So in the morning, just maybe making sure if you get a glass of water or making sure you make your breakfast are two really good things that you could do for yourself right when you wake up. And I think that's also where journaling can come in handy, because you can write out the things that you know you need to do and prioritize them, and that way they don't seem as daunting when they're kind of all in your head. Having them in front of you as like a checklist is really helpful, knowing that you need to do certain things, like again, getting in your water, getting 3 meals a day, making sure you're getting enough sleep, and then prioritizing yourself and going out on a walk or spending time with friends or family or pets. I think that's great ways to prioritize yourself during this month.
Yeah, like for me, I know that if I don't get enough sleep, my day can be ruined just because I'm so sensitive to rest and sleep. So exploring yourself and getting to know your needs can help with prioritization. And even if it's with exercise, I know that if I don't exercise, which happens a lot, I can still feel productive in other ways and it doesn't completely derail my day. So prioritizing what you know you need to help you feel better. And even if some of the things that we mentioned earlier, you feel like you can live without, you can just not incorporate it in your self-care routine. So it's really all about making sure you're prioritizing yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? That there's no one size fits all answer for self-care or, for everyone's different needs and abilities, but it's really finding something that works for you and helps, you feel supported and connected as well. And Meredith, I know we were getting into a few forms of emotional self-care earlier, but do you all know of any other forms of emotional self-care that can be beneficial?
Yeah, Hanah talked about this one earlier, but I just wanted to expand on it. But spending time with friends and family is some of the most overlooked forms of self-care. People don't really think of it as self-care, but studies have researched the effects that social interaction has on people diagnosed with PTSD, and have actually found that greater social support and positive social interactions were each associated with reductions in symptoms of PTSD. So it can be a normal response for survivors to isolate themselves after traumatic events like sexual violence, especially due to fear of exclusion and lack of support. But it's important to keep the relationships that you value in your life, because it really can have a positive impact on your mental health and foster healthy intimacy and the connection that we all need. Even if you are not a survivor and you're listening to this and maybe you work in the field of sexual violence response or prevention, using your social supports and leaning on coworkers and friends and family for support during Sexual Assault Awareness Month and every other month of the year is really crucial to maintaining, that part of our self-care. I think one of the things that we often associate with self-care is that it's expensive. I think there's a lot of people trying to sell self-care, right? Like the expensive face masks and the spa days and, expensive massages. And that's like what we're being sold as self-care. And when in reality, self-care, like we've talked about throughout this episode, is really just taking care of yourself, but doing it in an intentional way, not things that we just, go through the motions, but that we're intentionally taking time for ourselves. And I think that's the most important thing about self-care, is that we don't have to spend lots of money. It doesn't have to feel like we're, spending a ton of energy on our self-care as well. So That's just like the biggest piece of advice I would give to anyone looking to up their self-care is trial and error, see what works for you. If something's not working for you, don't feel obligated to continue doing it. Even if someone tells you it's their favorite form of self-care, everyone's different, so we should listen to that.
Yeah, Meredith, I totally agree with that as well. And Hanah, I know you had talked a little bit about social media and trying to maybe limit what we're seeing. Did you want to share a little bit more about that? That might be helpful for survivors or folks who might be experiencing triggers on social media this month.
Yes, I was just about to bring that up, so thank you. I know that like a lot of this content is primarily on social media. And if you're not on like maybe a campus or in a space where Sexual Assault Awareness Month is recognized, you probably won't run into it. So we do know that like a lot of this comes from social media. So I think it's so important to also recognize your limits there and knowing when you're feeling triggered or feeling these kinds of intense emotions. So just knowing that it's okay to take a step back from social media and that it's also okay to maybe even mute certain pages that are posting a lot about Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I think maybe sometimes people might feel guilty for wanting to do that or feel that they shouldn't, but in reality, you have to put yourself first and your own mental health first. So there are tons of ways that you can mute pages, unfollow, and refollow once the month is over. But yeah, I think just really prioritizing your mental health there and making sure you have a safe space, even when you're on your phone, especially when you're on your phone, because that's where we absorb so much media. I think just knowing your limits is really important during this month.
Thanks for listening to MCASA On the Go. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, part of our Sexual Assault Awareness Month podcast series. If you want to help support our podcast, please be sure to subscribe, share with others, and share on social media. To find your local rape crisis center, access resources, or get more information about MCASA and the Sexual Assault Legal Institute, please visit our website using the links in the episode description. We'll be back next week with another episode of our Sexual Assault Awareness Month series. Thanks for listening.